Well, those of you who saw my last presentation may remember that my computer crashed right in the middle of it. So the bar is very low for this one. If my computer doesn't crash in the middle, I'll be very happy. I did want to give you all a couple of updates on the ARP work. But I'm going to run through the slides. So some of this will cover known ground, but if you weren't here last time, it'll get you up to speed. And then the back half, I'll spend a little bit more time on, which is the new stuff. So we can't spend ARP money just on whatever we want. We have to spend it on what the US Treasury Department has told us we can spend it on. So those are a couple of different categories. Public health, which obviously is a lot of COVID-19 and related. So it could be ancillary to COVID-19, but it's still a lot of it's coming out of the COVID pandemic. Economic hardship. This is for people who've been disproportionately impacted by the economic fallout of COVID-19, laid off, reduced hours, lost wages. It's also for industries that have been particularly hard hit, such as leisure and hospitality. And we're hoping to assist small businesses, help rehire public sector staff, address education disparities, and build stronger neighborhoods. Anything we do, we have to show a nexus to COVID. So in other words, if this is just a problem we had and it has nothing to do with COVID, we cannot spend ARP money on it. If it is a problem that we had before, but it was made a lot worse by COVID, we can probably, that's the nexus. But we have to show that COVID is somehow related to what we're doing with this ARP money. Oh, and then the last part of that, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. We've really been waiting on Congress to pass the infrastructure package that made it through the Senate a few, oh gosh, like maybe a few months ago now. The House has been in some very tricky negotiations around whether the House is going to pass it before they pass the $3.5 trillion Biden budget in the Senate. So it's kind of a game of chicken right now where the House won't pass the infrastructure bill without the Senate passing the reconciliation budget. The reconciliation budget doesn't look very good in the Senate. So at the moment, the infrastructure bill doesn't look good in the House. And unfortunately, if the infrastructure bill doesn't pass, we're going to end up spending a lot more of this ARP money on water, sewer, and broadband than we otherwise would. Because water, sewer, and broadband get lots and lots of money from the infrastructure package. So without it, we're going to have to cover those expenses some other way, largely through ARP. One other thing to keep in mind is there are these census tracts called qualified census tracts. It's a HUD designation actually, but Treasury has said if you're spending money in a qualified census tract, you can basically presume that the money is going to disproportionately impact people. So in other words, in less affluent census tracts, we're going to just assume that the people there have been disproportionately impacted by COVID or the economic impact of COVID. So you have an easier time proving a COVID nexus in a qualified census tract. That's going to mean a lot of the ARP money is spent in these census tracts. Okay, so over the summer, so there have been two phases so far of ARP spending. I think the next slide. Yeah. I'm going to flip these slides a little bit. So there were two phases of ARP funding. The first round was kind of an emergency round where we put together something very quickly over the summer. We had about 3 weeks between when the Treasury guidelines came out and when Council went on summer recess. So we had to get all this, whatever we wanted to do in the first round, ready in a short amount of time. So we really focused on things that were not controversial at all, that were urgent needs, and that were very easy to, there was no question about whether they were eligible. So we ended up getting a $30 million package through Council that about half of it was for public health, vaccinations, suicide prevention, substance abuse. And then about the other half was most of the other half was some kind of housing assistance, so eviction prevention and utility and rental assistance. And then there was also some money for food distribution support, for childcare emergency PPE, basically for childcare centers so they can get back open. And a community ambassador program being expanded both in downtown and other neighborhoods. So because of the short timeline for that first round, we did not really have time to do much public process before that package was passed. Over the summer, council had a little more time to do that kind of public process. So council held 3 public meetings in July. We also had an online submission form, and council also had an online submission form. So we got more than 2,000 residents who provided feedback on those submission forms, and about 50 organizations, probably including the new organizations. So based on those meetings and all of that feedback, council approved these priority areas for the rest of the ARP money, which is about, this says 340 million. There was an additional 15 million in the first round of public health money. So that's where the discrepancy. So we're really down to about 340 million of remaining ARP money. So these are the priority areas. The top 4 are kind of the core 4, I think, and then the bottom 3 are additional. Premium pay is an interesting one I'll talk about in a second, but the top 4 are really where most of the conversations have been happening. Homelessness and affordable housing, workforce development, healthy Louisville and healthy neighborhoods. So that could be public health, it could be neighborhood amenities, public safety, which obviously has become a more important issue than it already was during COVID. Every city in the country is having a spike in violent crime. And then the bottom 3, premium pay, that means the Treasury guidelines have allowed us to give premium pay bonuses to essential workers. So they're workers in specific categories, and it could be public sector or it could be a mix of public and private. Not really sure, honestly, where council is going to go with this one, but it is something that a lot of unions have been advocating for among metro government unions. Public health contingencies, in other words, if with Delta, that's something we didn't foresee when we passed the first round of ARP money. So Delta is likely to take more it's likely to cost more than say if we didn't have the Delta surge. So if something else like that happens, then we'll end up spending more money on public health than we otherwise would. And then finally, eligible infrastructure. That's essentially, Congress has considered saying you can spend the ARP money on general infrastructure, which originally you were not allowed to. We've again been hoping that we didn't really have to do that because we would get an infrastructure package through Congress. So that one's sort of a wait and see. But if we end up spending money on general infrastructure, that could go to a lot of things. There's, I think we have about $2 billion in deferred maintenance needs in metro government. Okay, so Metro Council has set up their own work groups to discuss these, and these are like, they're like subcommittees by another name. So these are internal Metro Council work groups to discuss homelessness and affordable housing, workforce development, healthy Louisville, healthy neighborhoods, public safety, and premium pay. So that work is ongoing, and the council members are using those work groups to discuss the issues and basically figure out what they want to do and at what level of funding. Out of those work groups are going to come some ideas for proposals, and then the Louisville Accelerator team is going to be issuing RFAs on bonfire. The first one is actually supposed to come out today. So this is kind of breaking news. It will focus on supportive housing services for long-term supportive housing, and if you register on Bonfire, you should be able to see the RFA when it comes out. The RFAs are going to be looking for these criteria: expected outcomes and impact, feasibility and probability of success, time needed to achieve results, funding requirements, and sustainability. In other words, we don't want projects that absolutely need 10 years of funding or they're not going to work because we only have 3 years of funding. Leverage and partnerships, financial risk assessment, and ability to meet reporting requirements, which I've talked about before. The reporting is pretty intense. And then equity. So based on these RFAs, we will be then getting proposals, and based on those proposals, we will be able to go to Metro Council with here's what we put out, here are the proposals that came back, and based on that, council will decide funding and next steps. And then the accelerator team will, I think we're up to 4 project managers now, plus deputy director who's also a project manager. So that team will be helping make sure that the projects get executed, that they're following their timelines, that they're meeting the reporting requirements, and then they'll also be working with the Louisville Office of Management and Budget on the financial compliance. And that's what I've got. Oh, one more thing, since we talked about this last time, there's I thought I might get a question about this. So, but we had talked about smaller organizations not having the financial wherewithal to basically float the money and then get reimbursed, which is currently how it's set up. So we've been working on a solution where we hope to be able to bridge that gap, where we could have someone else float the money and then have the organization get reimbursed. I can't announce anything yet. We're not quite there, but I think we're pretty close. So I think we'll have some kind of stopgap. And again, it's possible that Treasury comes out with the final regulations and says, oh, you know what, never mind. We don't need to go the reimbursement route. You can just have organizations get the money up front. So I don't have quite an announcement on that, but I do think we're close to a solution. Okay. That's all I've got. So I'm happy to take questions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, folks, thank you. Thank you, Eric, for the update. If you have any questions, I invite you all to put them down in the chat. So Eric, thank you for addressing small nonprofits. That was a question that we had. We also have a couple other questions that came through. One with regards to the priorities. Is there a ranking in terms of how the priorities are set?
You mean in terms of the RFA criteria? Or do you mean the priority areas?
Within those priority areas.
So in terms of housing versus workforce or whatever, yeah.
Yes.
No is the answer. I think there's some natural tension, I think, in having different council members on different work groups, because presumably every work group is going to want maximal funding for their priority area. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. I do think housing's one that everybody's talking about, and it's obviously an expensive problem. So I do think a significant chunk of the money will go to affordable housing and homelessness. But how much that is, I don't have any information on that.
Okay. And what category does the arts and education fall?
Those would be under like healthy neighborhoods or workforce. So if you're an arts organization, I mean, this is an important distinction. There's not an arts bucket, right? So if you're an arts organization, be watching for those RFAs and try to figure out how you can craft a proposal that meets the criteria of the RFA. So if a workforce proposal comes out, something that helps struggling artists from a workforce perspective would be, that's meeting the criteria of the RFA. That's going to have a better chance of success, I would think, than something that's strictly from the arts perspective.
All right, terrific, thank you. There's been a lot of talk around collaboration amongst nonprofits, and we know it's important, and CNP fully supports it, but it takes resources to pull all that together, right? So and maintain those collaborations for logistics. How is the funding process taking this into account, if any?
So I do think there's an administrative line. I would quote you something, but I'm worried I would be off. But there's kind of there's an understanding that you need admin to execute what you're trying to do. So there is part of that. It might also depend on the RFA how big that admin part goes.
Okay. Then we had a question about locating a list of members on the various ARP working groups. Is there a place where we can find that?
Not to my knowledge. I can run that question back and see if there's one that's going up. I should also say, if you're not on our email distribution list, you can send an email to accelerator@louisvilleky.gov. There's currently an email distribution list. At some point, hopefully in the next, say 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be replacing the email with a Gov Delivery newsletter. The newsletter, I hope, will have not just what the latest information is on RFAs that are coming out or council actions, but also some context for what's happening. So, for example, housing, why is housing a big issue? What are the factors at play? What are we doing about it? Or what are we looking for? So that doesn't happen yet, but if you register on the email list, when that newsletter comes out, you'll get an email about the newsletter.
Can you
I'll
repeat
put the email in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. We had a question about getting more information about the RFA process. Bonfire.com seems to be intended for agencies. Is there a place where we can get more information about the RFA?
Yeah, I can put the Bonfire link. Tell you what, after I'm done talking, I'll get the Bonfire link and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. And this, I think, this next question feeds into the capacity issue with nonprofits in general. Has there been any talk about using money to expand capacity for nonprofits to relieve them from delivering so many services? Can Metro hire more staff, including expertise from nonprofits?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, we have just hired 4 or 5 project managers for the accelerator team. I think part of the idea is that they will be helping. I mean, in a sense, the project management includes technical assistance to make sure that the grantees are meeting the reporting and timeline and other obligations of the ARP money. But I think, in terms of just a general, anything we do has to fit into those priority areas. So there's not going to be kind of a general nonprofit support bucket. But if you're a nonprofit that is in workforce or, public health or neighborhood development or any of those things, watch for the RFAs and kind of work through that process. And if there's something that you think needs to be happening that's not happening, email the accelerator email that gets checked by Margaret and Ken on the accelerator team. You can also email me, and I'm happy to pass that along. I'll put my email in the chat too. Yeah, if you think there's something that is sort of desperately missing, absolutely feel free to communicate that. And we can't offer specific advice to people about how to, say, submit the RFAs. but I can say, well, here's what's, here's the RFA that's out, or here's the council priority that's been articulated. So we're at a different stage of the process than we were at, say, 2 or 3 months ago, where it was still fairly open-ended what was going to happen. The parameters have been narrowed a bit. So now it's a question of how does what you do fit into the parameters that have been articulated, and how can you use those priority areas to meet the community's needs through the work that you're doing.
Thank you. The next question is about the criteria. He's asking if there's you could speak a little more about the criteria a little bit, or is that available on?
Sure. Let me see if I can share my screen again. By the way, the low bar, I mean, we met that low bar. My computer did not crash. Always happy to exceed expectations. Okay, so next steps. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So these are the criteria that are, or the factors that are going to be in the RFAs. Expected outcomes and impacts. So, I think the more people who are impacted, probably the better. Now, not every proposal needs to impact tens of thousands of people. So it's not necessarily, you might have, say, I don't know, like a workforce program that's training 100 people or something. That might be fine. I don't have any way of saying ahead of time what the outcomes and impacts are going to need to be, but that's going to be part of how the RFAs are evaluated. Feasibility and probability of success. So, there's some things we're just not going to be able to get done in 3 years with this funding, even if it's a very, noble objective. It's just not likely to happen. Time needed to achieve results. Again, that goes to the question of, can you do this with 3 years of funding? I'll use the workforce example again, just because it's something I'm more familiar with, but you can train people, you can train a certain number of people in 3 years. Once the money runs out, you just stop training that certain number of people, but it's not like the people get untrained, whereas if you built something that needed continual staffing, and then in 3 years you run out of money for staffing, then it's just an empty building. So that's how to think about the time needed to achieve results part is, and that also goes to the sustainability section. Is this something that's going to continue to have a positive impact on our community even after the ARP money runs out? Leverage and partnerships. I mean, I would assume pretty much everybody on this call is already great at partnering with other organizations. That's how most of us get anything done. But demonstrate those partnerships. Financial risk assessment, ability to meet reporting requirements. That's really about, do you have a capacity to pay back the money and to meet the reporting requirements, because those are really going to be important. Because basically, if we don't meet the reporting requirements, so if we make a grant and the sub-grantee doesn't, or the grantee doesn't meet the reporting requirements, then it falls back on Metro, and then Metro may end up having to repay the money. And what we don't want is to do things that we think are a good idea, but actually don't meet the Treasury requirements. And in 3 years, we have a Treasury Inspector General who says, well, actually you didn't meet the requirements, so you have to pay back $50 million, and we don't have $50 million, so that's where that comes in. And then obviously equity is such an important part of everything we're doing now. So if you're not showing equity impact, you should be, figure out how your proposal is helping reduce equity gaps in Louisville.
All right, great. Thank you for that elaboration. Can you remind us when the RFAs will appear on the website? Is that today?
Yeah, there should be one out today on supportive housing services. So be on the lookout.
Okay, great. And then believe, Eric, you shared the PowerPoint with us last time, the last update.
Yeah, happy to share it.
Okay, great, thank you. Will there be any thought to the projects that coordinate across different needs or within neighborhoods?
They coordinate across different what?
Different needs or within neighborhoods?
Across different needs. So like something that's housing and public health.
I believe so. Harrison, did you want to elaborate on that for us, please?
Yeah, sure. I was just wondering. Hi, good morning. I was just wondering because it sounds like the RFAs are going to be kind of like narrowly tackling certain issues in some cases. So I was just wondering how, with so much money going out, what sort of coordination there could be between different like organizations working in the same place, or organizations tackling different issues under different RFAs. Like, I didn't know if council was thinking about that, or if that's something you're looking for in proposals or that kind of thing.
I mean, I think certainly organizations can collaborate on coming up with a response or coming up with a submission. And the accelerator team is providing I think an overall coordinating function. So it's all one team, even though they have project managers that have different focuses, but they're all under one umbrella. So that was part of the intention of setting up the accelerator team, was that it would help coordinate. So like for example, we're not. Another way of doing this would be just running it through the mayor's office, and then the RFAs are coming out from the different agencies. Like one's coming out from revitalization and community services, one's coming out from housing. This is more cross-functional than that, but there are still going to be natural sort of some are going to be more. Some people are going to be more housing focused, and others are going to be more public safety.
Cool, thank you.
Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like once we see like some of the RFAs, it'll help me understand.
That'll probably help. Yeah, I think that'll help.
All right, thank you. Metro Council Work Group, would it be beneficial to work with them? Assigned to a priority funding area such as healthy living and healthy neighborhoods?
So those council work groups are council work groups. They're not accelerator team. They're not mayor's office. Council is running the show there. And I think, I think the council members feel, well, I don't want to speak for them, but I think basically the work groups are set up so that council can get comfortable with approaches for each of these areas, or at least kind of broad categories of approaches and what kind of impact they're looking for. So I think the council work groups are going to inform the RFAs, and I think the responses to the RFAs are going to inform what actually ends up happening. So just because an RFA comes out and it says we're looking for X, Y, and Z, doesn't mean that QRS are out of the picture. It just means that RFA is looking at X, Y, and Z. And again, if you think, well, you seriously left out a hugely important part of this equation, it's okay to, like you can communicate that to me, you can communicate that to the accelerator team, or you could respond to the RFA and say, we can do this part, but you're leaving out a huge other chunk. And that could come back and inform what ends up happening, or what ultimately ends up getting funded.
All right, thank you. With regards to emails and links, as well as this recording of the session plus the PowerPoint, we'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of all of that, so you can follow up accordingly. So we'll do an email follow-up, and also I'm sure have that posted on our website in addition to publishing it in our e-news. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll make sure that everyone has the bonfire link and link to all the other resources. All right, so let's see. And allowable expenses. Are there any unallowable expense categories? For instance, capital.
Yes, there are unallowable expense categories. I think I said before, general infrastructure is not allowable, but that wouldn't necessarily apply if, say, you had say like a substance abuse treatment RFA came out, and part of your proposal was that you need to renovate your facility, but it's not going to create ongoing unsustainable expenses beyond the 3 years. You know, that would not necessarily be unallowable, just because. So building stuff may be okay. It's just you can't build stuff that creates an unsustainable financial commitment, and you can't build stuff that doesn't have a COVID nexus. Well, you know, or is like general infrastructure would be roads, bridges, power lines, you know, whatever, that kind of stuff. In general, the ARP wasn't designed for that, although they may change their minds and allow infrastructure. But that's mostly not what we're looking at this point. There are a lot of other unallowable expenses. Again, look for the RFAs. The RFAs that come out are going to be asking for proposals for allowable expenses. So I think that's, you probably don't need to worry about that as much, because what you're going to be responding to is going to include questions. You'll be responding to questions about things that are allowable. Now, I do think maybe the last presentation I gave here had more of a breakdown about what was allowable and what wasn't. At any rate, I can dig up the chart we were using 2 or 3 months ago that broke that down, and I'd be happy to send that along.
Great, terrific, thanks. And I know that we have your last PowerPoint available up on our website as well.
I can't remember if it was in that one or not, but.
Tony had a question that I'm not sure. Tony, can you unmute yourself and maybe elaborate on the question that you had?
Oh, I see that question.
Sure. I mean, my point was that if we're thinking very short term here, kind of, you know, we can do proof of concepts during this, right? That would have broader systems impact. And that could be arguments for sustainable funding moving forward, not necessarily federal funding, but might come from other sources, you know, local or state sources. So I was just curious about, you know, is the 3-year comment that you made of funding, you know, should people focus on that 3 years, or should they focus on proof of concept for larger projects?
Yeah, so I think both. You know, you can prove the concept and still not get funded in 4 years. So I can't promise that just because you did a good job, there will be, you know, that it's politics. So, you know, neither the federal government nor metro government in 4 years can be counted on to do anything in particular. But definitely if you show a tracker, I mean, I think a lot of the things we're going to be doing over the next 3 years are going to be testing premises and proving concepts, because we don't usually have this amount of money. So we'll be able to show, well, actually, it turns out when you have $380 million and you can put X amount of money into this issue, it got a lot better. So I think we will have a better handle on what solutions could look like. But whether funding follows them, you know, we'll see. I mean, to be honest, we're never likely to see this amount of money in one fell swoop ever again. Probably not in our lifetimes. It's an unprecedented amount of money that came under very unusual circumstances that seem unlikely to repeat themselves, at least hopefully.
All right, so we have a couple more questions here. Andrew had a question about collaboration. It says, during the first meeting, Margaret Handmaker encouraged collaborative efforts and broadly scoped initiatives. Is this still a priority consideration? An emphasis by Metro Council and the accelerator team?
Yes, I think so. Again, we can't do anything without a lot of other people and partners. So I think whatever solutions end up getting proposed or whatever RFAs go out, we're going to need broad collaboration in those priority areas to get to enact the change.
All right. Next question, will council allocate all funding in one go over the next several months, or is it going to be more iterative over the next few years?
Yeah, that's a good question, Harrison. I don't totally know. All I can say is we only have half the money right now. Another half is coming out in May. So they may decide not to make any decisions about the second half of the money until we get the second half of the money. On the other hand, they might say, well, we anticipate getting this money, so we're going to go ahead and allocate the full amount. I think that remains to be determined. It also might depend on priority.
And then any other funds be reserved for follow-on funding to scale up successful solutions?
Again, I think it's going to depend. You know, that's basically the budget committee's decision.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. Becky has a question about HUD home ARP funds. Is all the money that will be possibly spent on affordable housing going to come from the HUD home ARP funds, or are there some that will come from Metro's ARP funds?
Yeah, there will definitely be some coming from Metro ARP funds. The home funds are great. So I think whatever we spend from the Metro ARP funds will be on top of some funding we already got. And we're also, getting the emergency rental assistance program money, and there's some utility assistance money, although we put some additional utility assistance from our ARP funds as well. So, but yes, some of the 340 million that we have left, a significant chunk I would imagine will go to housing. But again, that'll be determined by the council's priority area work groups in the budget committee.
Will the city engage non-Louisville Metro government council partners around proposals that will come in, or will the review of our RFAs be only Louisville Metro and then Metro Council?
It's a good question, Ashley. I don't know the answer, so let me ask and get back to you.
All right, thank you. Other questions for Eric? Anyone? Well, as I mentioned, the session has been recorded. Eric will provide us with a copy of the PowerPoint, and then we'll share all of that, including any links and email addresses, so that you all can get up-to-date information on the funds and the RFAs as we go through it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ed. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Again, Eric, many thanks for taking the time to be with us this morning. Your information, your insights, the inside baseball stuff is really, really helpful. And thanks for offering to be a contact to this community after today and as we actually get into this application process. So many thanks. And I want to thank all of our participants today for joining us and for your many thoughtful questions and comments. Thank you for taking this very important issue, this very important opportunity so seriously. Thanks for being here. I imagine we'll need to reconvene in a few weeks and to continue the updates, the sharing, the conversation around art. So watch for that. And also watch for other CNPE opportunities to gather with your colleagues in this space. So until the next, we're still amid so many challenges these days. So let us be mindful of that, continue to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other. Bye now.